You're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Thad Jones, his biography, and best hits. He came from one of the most remarkable families in jazz history, brother to pianist Hank Jones and drummer Elvin Jones. But Thad carved out his own path. Largely self-taught, he was playing professionally as a teenager, served in the army bands during World War II, and then went on to become a featured soloist and arranger with the Count Basie Orchestra in the 1950s. But that's just the beginning. We're going to trace his journey from those early Basie years to the formation of the legendary Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra, from the village vanguard in New York all the way to Copenhagen, Denmark, where he spent his final years shaping another great big band. Trumpeter, flugelhorn master, composer of A Child Is Born, architect of modern big band jazz. This is the story of Thad Jones and why his influence still echoes today. So that was some insight into the biography and best hits of Thad Jones. More details coming up. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Thad Jones, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. Thad Jones was born Thaddeus Joseph Jones on March 28, 1923 in Pontiac, Michigan. And if the last name Jones rings the bells in jazz circles, it should. He grew up in one of the most remarkable musical families in American history. His older brother was the legendary pianist Hank Jones, his younger brother the thunderous revolutionary drummer Elvin Jones. But here's what's interesting. Thad was largely self-taught. Trumpet, cornet, flugelhorn, he picked them up and figured them out. By the time he was 16 years old, he was already performing professionally. No formal conservatory training, just ears, instinct and drive. During World War II from 1943 to 1946, he served in the US Army bands. And like many jazz musicians of their generation, that military band experience sharpened his discipline and broadened his musical skills. When he came home, he didn't just ease into the jazz world, he stepped right into it. After working with various regional bands, the big break came in May of 1954. Thad Jones joined the Count Basie Orchestra. Now pause there for a second. That's like getting drafted into the New York Yankees of swing. Basie's band was one of the most powerful institutions in jazz, and Thad didn't just sit in the trumpet section, he became a featured soloist. If you ever heard Basie's April in Paris, listen closely to that trumpet solo. That's Thad. Warm, lyrical, confident. It's one of those solos that feels both elegant and effortless. He also shines on classics like Shiny Stockings and Corner Pocket. But he wasn't just blowing brilliant solos, he was writing. Thad contributed nearly 24 arrangements of the Basie book. Pieces like The Deacon, HRH, and Counterblock. Those charts helped shape the Basie sound of the late 50s, swinging, modern, harmonically rich, but still accessible. And in 1959, he even stepped outside the Basie orbit to guest with Thelonious Monk on the album 5 by Monk by 5. By 1963, Thad made a bold move. He left the security of Basie's orchestra and stepped into the unpredictable life of a New York freelancer. That's a leap of faith, but it allowed him to stretch out creatively. In the mid-60s, he recorded small group sessions, especially notable collaborations with baritone saxophonist Pepper Adams. These recordings showed another side of him, blues-inflected, fluid, adventurous, hard bop with sophistication. And here's one of the favorite quotes about him. Charles Mingus, not exactly known for casual praise, once said, "Thad Jones was the greatest trumpet I've ever heard in this life," and that's serious respect. But then came what might be his most lasting contribution. In 1965, Thad co-founded the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra with drummer Mel Lewis. And starting in February 1966, they began holding Monday night gigs at the Village Vanguard in New York City. For 12 years, the band became one of the most influential big bands in modern jazz. Thad wrote most of the charts, intricate harmonies, tight ensemble writing, but always grounded in blues and swing. Pieces like Central Park North, Consummation, and The Groove Merchant became staples. And his ballad A Child Is Born, that one transcended jazz. It became a standard, tender, haunting, beautiful. In 1978, the orchestra won a Grammy for Live in Munich. By then, they were internationally recognized. This wasn't nostalgia big band, this was modern, living, breathing orchestral jazz. Then, in a move that surprised just about everyone, Thad relocated to Copenhagen, Denmark in January 1979. And he didn't slow down. He became leader of the Danish radio big band and elevated it to world-class status. He formed another ensemble called Eclipse, blending American expatriates and Danish musicians. He even studied composition formally during this time and picked up the valve trombone. Always learning, always evolving. Copenhagen embraced him so deeply that after his passing, they named a street in his honor, Thad Jones Bench. In 1985, he returned to the United States to lead the Count Basie Orchestra after Basie's death. It felt poetic, coming full circle. But health issues, including serious lip problems and cancer, forced him to step down. He returned to Copenhagen and passed away on August 20th, 1986 at just 63 years old. Thad Jones left behind something rare. He was equally respected as a soloist, a composer, and arranger. He could burn through b-hop lines with agility, then turn around and play the most lyrical velvet-toed flugelhorn ballad you've ever heard. And whether it's those classic blue note small group albums like Detroit, New York Junction and the magnificent Thad Jones, or the powerhouse writing of the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra, his music still sounds modern, still swings, still surprises. So that was some insight into the biography of Thad Jones, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Thad Jones, his biography and best hits. Now it's time for some trendy music news. International jazz great Dan Damon is back with a brand new album called Needed Time, and this one hits the soul. Out now on all streaming platforms, Needed Time is a blues-soaked instrumental journey through classic spirituals. Damon teams up with celebrated Bay Area bassist Kurt Ribach, delivering a modern take on 1950 Needed Time classic by Lightning Hopkins. The project was sparked when Damon heard that original recording in late 2025, and he fell in love with its heartfelt plea for presence and hope. Drawing inspiration from jazz legends like Charlie Haydn and Hank Jones, Damon blends 33 years as a Methodist pastor with world-class jazz sensibility. The result, a record he calls a love letter to a hurting and beautiful world. So this album proves once again why critics are calling Dan Damon world-class. So that was some trendy music news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. We are going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Thad Jones' best albums of all time. Stay tuned. You're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Thad Jones' biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. So after we talk about the life of Thad Jones, we turn to the music, specifically those early small group recordings that really show who he was as a player. Before the big band orchestra, before the Village Vanguard Mondays, before the Grammy events, mid-1950s Blue Note sessions like Detroit, New York Junction and the magnificent Thad Jones, hard bop records packed with lyrical trumpet lines, blues feeling and Detroit-bred swing. We'll hear how he balanced standards with original compositions and how his tone, especially a flugelhorn, could stop you in your tracks. We'll also touch on Mad Thad, where Basie energy meets small group drive, and the family session Keeping Up with the Joneses featuring all three Jones brothers together. So these albums don't just introduce Thad the soloist, they introduce Thad the composer and arranger in formation. So if you want to understand the foundation of everything that came later, this is where it starts. So now that we've talked about the life of Thad Jones, the bands, the big orchestras, the international moves, let's zoom in on something a little more intimate. So whether we're talking about his time before the Village Vanguard Mondays, before the big Grammy-winning orchestra, before Denmark, these were the small group Blue Note sessions. So let's begin in 1956 with Detroit, New York Junction on Blue Note Records. This was Thad's debut as a leader for the label. Recorded in June of '56, it brought together what you could call Detroit to New York pipeline of talent. Thad on trumpet, Billy Michel on tenor sax, Tommy Flanagan on piano, Kenny Burrell on guitar, Oscar Pettiford on bass, Shadow Wilson on drums. The album runs just over half an hour, 5 tracks, clean, focused, straight ahead. 2 Rodgers and Hart standards, Blue Room and Little Girl Blue, and 3 Thad originals, Tariff, Scratch and Zick. Now here's where you really hear him. Little Girl Blue is done as a duet, just Thad's trumpet and Kenny Burrell's guitar. No rhythm section cushioning, no horns behind him, just tone and space. And that's when you understand something about Thad Jones. He wasn't just about complexity. He had this vocal cord to his phrasing, he could let a melody breathe. Then on the originals, especially Scratch and Zick, you hear the other side. These are longer blues-based jams. Scratch stretches past 10 minutes, and Thad doesn't just solo, he unfolds ideas. You can hear him pushing, testing phrases, leading into that hardball vocabulary. Now historically, critics at the time called this album solid, maybe not revolutionary, but what it does do is introduce Thad Jones as a composer and bandleader. It plants the flag. And today it's appreciated as the beginning of something bigger. Later that same year in 1956, he came back into the studio and recorded what many critics consider his finest Blue Note small group date, the magnificent Thad Jones. The personnel shifts slightly. Billy Michel returns on tenor, Barry Harris is on piano, Percy Hart on bass, and Max Roach on drums. That's a heavyweight rhythm section right there. The album opens up with April in Paris, the same tune he made famous with Basie. But this version is slower, more intimate. You really hear his tone here, warm, almost vocal-like, slightly vibrato. And then there's If Someone Had Told Me. This is the emotional core of the record. It's essentially a trio, flugelhorn, piano, brushes. And when Thad switches to flugelhorn, everything softens. The sound gets rounder, more burnished. He stretches out the melody like he's telling a story. It's one of those performances where you stop whatever you're doing and just listen. The album balances ballads with blues-driven originals like Billy Do. You can hear Barry Harris comping with elegance. This record showcases all sides of Thad, the lyrical balladeer, the blues player, the disciplined improviser, the subtle arranger. Many critics consider this the crown jewel of his 1950s output. It's been remastered, reissued, praised across decades, and for a good reason, it holds up completely. Now let's move into 1957 and something a little more punchy, Mad Thad record for Period Records. This one feels different right away. The band expands into a septet. You've got Frank Foster on tenor, a Basie heavyweight, Joe Jones on drums. On soundtracks, you even get Thad's brother Elvin Jones. Tommy Flanagan returns on piano, Doug Watkins on bass. There's a little Basie DNA running through this entire session. The title track, Mad Thad, was arranged by Quincy Jones. That's another heavy connection, and it swings with authority. But the track everyone talks about, Birdsong. This is Thad's blues motif theme that became something of a minor classic. It's catchy, it's memorable, and it's also harmonically clever. You can hear the seeds of the arranger he would later become. Charles Mingus, who didn't hand out compliments lightly, praised his album and specifically Birdsong. That tells you something about the respect Thad commanded among his peers. And finally, let's talk about something special, Keeping Up with the Joneses from 1958. This is the family record. Thad on trumpet and flugelhorn, Hank Jones on piano, Elvin Jones on drums, and bassist Eddie Jones, no relation, just rounding out the lineup. Produced by Leonard Feather, this is one of the rare moments when all three Jones brothers recorded together. And you can hear the comfort. There's relaxed energy to this session. Thad's flugelhorn tone is rich and warm. Hank's piano is elegant, maybe even a little restrained. And Elvin, who later became this volcanic force with Coltrane, plays mostly brushes here. Subtle, controlled. The title track, Keeping Up with the Joneses, swings lightly. 3 and 1 is a clever nod to the three brothers plus Eddie on bass. H&T Blues highlights that family interplay. This isn't a dynamic record, it's charming. It feels like musicians who grew up in the same house finishing each other's sentences. And for fans, it's treasured for exactly that reason. So if you're exploring Thad Jones beyond the big orchestra years, these early albums tell the story. You hear the trumpet player finding his voice, the composer stretching, the blues foundation underneath it all. On this week's episode, it's about Thad Jones, his biography and best hits. Now it's time for some trendy music tips. Renowned flutist and educator Bill McBurney has just released a brand new paperback, Simplify Your Approach to Improvisation, a practical 10-step guide for all instrumentalists. It's available now on Amazon worldwide, and if you're serious about sharpening your improv skills, this one's worth a look. Building on his earlier work, The Technique and Theory of Improvisation, McBurney lays out a clear, structured 10-step system for understanding any chart or lead sheet. We're talking real usable tools, theory breakdown, step-by-step guidance, plus detailed analysis of 10 standard tunes. He even dives into free improvisation and ear development. Whether you're a beginner just finding your voice or a seasoned player looking for more clarity and confidence, this guide promises a systematic approach that makes improvisation feels less intimidating and a lot more musical. For more information, visit www.extremeflute.com. So that was some trendy music news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Thad Jones' best albums of all time. Stay tuned.